Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here with you all and share parts of my journey. Um, I'm let's see, 50, gonna be 58 years old this March, and I published the book a year ago in November during Adoption Awareness Month, and it's been quite a journey. I think the book itself was very healing. But importantly, it really enabled me to connect more with folks in the adoption community, the adoption constellation, and it really raised my awareness to how important story is and how important it is to tell your story and how much story matters, especially to adoptees and especially to birth parents, and adoptive parents as well, because I think we all have so much to learn from each other. I think for me, the process was healing, but it also really opened my eyes. For example, I learned that I'm a baby scoop baby. I didn't really realize that before. I was born in 68, and my birth mom, and I talk about her, I never got to meet her. I did find my birth mother's family in my 30s, but my birth mom, Judy, was your typical um, woman who became pregnant at age 19. Originally, the story was that she was raped. Whether or not that really happened is a question I still don't have a real answer to, but she was sent away to a home for unwed mothers, Marillac home, close to the Detroit area where I'm from, and literally stands for without marriage or lack of marriage, and went away, had me while she was away and then was told she couldn't bring that baby home. So, kind of your typical baby scoop, lots of coercion, I think, was involved. I think she probably would have wanted to keep me, but wasn't supported. And so, the process really of diving in and telling my story, although I knew that part of my story, really helped me gain more awareness about the baby scoop era, about that situation, and it really helped me develop a lot more empathy for her. Because I think I speak for myself, but I think I've heard other adoptees say when you grow up adopted, there's always that question, why wasn't I wanted? And the awareness that I gained was it really wasn't a question of whether or not I was wanted. It was a question of whether or not she was supported. And I think that that's what a lot of women faced and have faced, and especially in that era. So, I really start my book off with a little scene from my daughter and I, um, and she's here with me, and she's great being on camera. This is Izzy. Um, so I start off with a little scene that's a little almost a foreshadowing, and then kind of dive into what it was like growing up chosen, I call it, because that's what you're told. You're chosen. And you don't realize till later, and I didn't even realize till I was writing the book and some of the things that I experienced, how heavy that term is to be chosen and that it's not necessarily a good thing. But I take you through my childhood. My adoptive parents were amazing. I lost them way too soon, but they were actually phenomenal people. I was lucky, as they say, which is another very heavy thing for adoptees to say that we're lucky. Why are we lucky? Just because we had parents who loved us. I mean, folks who are kept don't necessarily think they're lucky just because their parents love them. So a lot of heaviness around that terminology too. But despite that, that is really how I grew up under that lens and through that lens of feeling very lucky because I could have been anywhere. And then fast forward to my 30s when I found my birth mom's family, actually by searching myself. I contacted Catholic Social Services, which was Catholic Charities at the time, and I was actually given my birth aunt and birth grandmother's information. And then I was told very casually over the phone by the social worker when I asked about my birth mother, I was told, oh, your birth mother died. And it was like an afterthought. So that was heavy because my whole life I'd always dreamt and fantasized about getting to meet her. But that did turn out to be a really good thing, meeting my birth mom's family. What was fascinating about it was my birth mom's family grew up down the street from my adoptive family. So, literally in the same town down the street. And when I received the information that night, my daughter, who was about, I think, 6 or 7 at the time, we piled into the car with my husband and we went directly to the house with the address. And I know she was more like, she's correcting me, she was 5. So she was 5. She's going like this to me. So went up to the door and knocked on the door while they waited in the car. And a young gentleman answered the door that definitely didn't fit an age range of somebody that would have been my aunt or my grandmother. And when I asked about the Thomases, told me that Sally Thomas had passed away recently and that the Thomases had moved out, but that the neighbor next door knew the family. So I walked next door to the neighbor and I knock on the door and a woman answers and I look at her and she looks at me and I said, Denise, and she said, Lisa. She was a nurse that had trained me when I was a brand new grad at the local hospital. And she looked at me and she said, when I told her I was looking for Sally Thomas, she looked at me and she said, oh my God, you're Judy's daughter, which was my birth mother's name. So my mom and my birth mother shared the same name. And so she said, come in, come in. And I waved my daughter and my husband in, and that just opened up this, for the next 2 hours, just this immense fascination. And what was really incredible was when she said to me, your grandfather was a patient on the unit that you worked on. And quite certain that at some point, I probably laid my stethoscope on him at some point and never knew. So that was a pretty amazing, can't make that up kind of story and journey. And the first person that Denise decided she would contact was my Aunt Janice. And the first time I got to talk to my aunt was just amazing and surreal. And she oddly sounded familiar. And she's a twin. So I have twin aunts, Janice and Jeannie, and they're amazing. Um, yeah, I think my Aunt Janice is on. Oh, there she is. And I have an uncle, but he passed away a couple years ago that I was really close to as well, my uncle JT. And then I have an uncle Monty and an uncle Fred, my Aunt Janice's husband and my Aunt Jeannie's husband. So it's been amazing. They've been in my life ever since. True, true blessing. And so fast forward in the story to I'm about 51, I think. And my daughter thought it would be a great idea to get us Ancestry DNA kits for Christmas, 2019. And I think it was, yeah, 18. And then we didn't do them until my husband and my daughter did them in 2019 in January. And my daughter's results came through and she and I are sitting up one night. It's about 11:30 at night. And she says, oh, Mom, my results are in. And at this point, she's got the app on her phone and she's got it all downloaded and she's ready to check it all out. And she's talking about, oh my gosh, we're this, we're this. And then suddenly she goes, who's this guy? And I'm thinking to myself, I know all the Thomases. I know everybody. So who could this be? And I look over and it hits me. This is my birth father. So for the first time, I see the picture of my birth father. And
You're missing a crucial detail.
what crucial detail am I missing?
We looked up what it means to share that much DNA.
Oh, the DNA, the amount. That's right. Because it didn't say birth father. It was some large amount of a match. I can't remember what allele or something like that. Centimeters. Yeah. So thanks, Izzy.
We had to look up what that
Yeah, we had to look up what that meant.
And
it said grandparent. And then that's when the realization hit me because this was on Izzy's results that this was my birth father. And that was pretty surreal, to say the least. I never had any idea I'd ever know who he was because my birth mother never talked about him, never told anybody who she was. And the story was that she was raped. So I woke my husband up and then I did a pretty intense background check. I also did my own ancestry DNA just to kind of verify. And sure enough, he showed up even higher match, and likely parent was actually on the match. And I kind of let it go, especially after I did the background check. And I saw that he seemed like a perfectly respectable person. Found out at that point I had a brother, a half brother, and my birth father was married. And I had no interest in disrupting somebody's life and turning their life upside down. So, about 9 months later, following December, my husband and I are sitting there on a snowy afternoon. I'm looking out the window with the snow coming down. I look down at my phone and it says, "You have a message from Ancestry DNA." And the name was my birth father's name. So, very first time. And I literally felt the world shift underneath me. That, I can't even begin to come up with the words to describe what that felt like. So the message said, "It appears we have a close match on Ancestry DNA. This is my email and my phone number. If you don't contact me, I understand." Well, I did contact him, and it started with emails. And it was a very intense amount of communication over the next 24 hours. And the next day, I did actually talk to him on the phone. And about 20 minutes into the conversation, I said to him, "I have a question for you, and you're probably not going to like it." And I could hear him suck a breath in and brace himself. I can still remember this like yesterday. And I said, "I was told that my birth mother was raped, but she knew the guy." And his immediate response, as somebody who is a healthcare professional who really still wanted a different story, his immediate response was, "Well, that couldn't be. Um, that kind of thing never happened. It was just heavy petting, that kind of story." And how he could recall those details, but yet not know who she was is kind of amazing. But I took it and I wanted a different story. I wanted a different narrative. And I had no idea that I was being told a story by a master storyteller. So I accepted that and embarked in about a 5-year journey that just about tore me and my family apart. Because what started off a fairy tale for the first several months quickly became a very, very painful experience. He was an alcoholic and I didn't know it. And from the very beginning, I was told stories about how much his wife did not accept the situation. And it took about 2 months for him to finally tell my brother about me. And we did eventually meet, and he's in my life now. I'm actually going to see him on Thursday night. He's battling cancer right now, and my husband and I are going to see him, and I just went to see him a couple months ago. Um, but it was about a 5-year journey that I talk in great detail about in the book. Um, I don't regret that I know who he is, and I don't regret the experience. And I have a brother. I always wanted a sibling, and I feel blessed for that. I do regret how much I let somebody in that hurt me so deeply. I regret my family being hurt by it. I lost myself, but I found myself. Hence, I became inspired to write the book. So within the book, I weave who I am as a healthcare professional, what it's like taking care of patients and women, and how many parallels there are to being an adoptee and taking care of women. I take care of women who are at elevated risk for breast cancer. And one of the things I talk to them about is doing genetic testing. And I tell them the same thing that I would tell someone who does a DNA test. Be careful what you find out. You can't unknow. I could never unknow once I saw that picture on the DNA, on the ancestry DNA, once I got that first contact, you can't go back from that. So I kind of counsel women the same way. If you want to have genetic testing, I support you. It can help you be proactive and make decisions about screening. But at the same time, realize if you find out you carry a mutation that puts you at elevated risk, you can't unknow. So I think a lot of what I talk about in my story is how many parallels and how much of an awareness I have about all of the nuances being an adoptee, being a trauma survivor, and taking care of women who are sometimes dealing with very traumatic situations, circumstances. Just knowing you're at elevated risk for breast cancer is traumatic. Every time you get a mammogram, every time you get an MRI. And I also tell women when they have a diagnosis of breast cancer. So, very traumatic. In my experience with trauma, I think even just being an adoptee, although I had a beautiful childhood, beautiful life, it's still traumatic. And then the trauma of my birth father and those experiences gives you such a lens when you're taking care of folks who experience trauma. It was also the motivation for me to become certified this past year as a trauma-informed care practitioner, to have that extra level of sensitivity, not just coming from the lens of a trauma survivor, but taking care of women in in that way and having that extra layer of sensitivity. So that's as much in a nutshell, as I think I can do in a summary, really the journey, and what I tried to weave through, and really end the book with healing, um, some practical knowledge about healing, some things that helped me. I think it's definitely a circular process. You know, some days you feel like you're 10 steps ahead and you might take a couple steps back, but you definitely the amount of growth and the moving forward that I've been able to do, even since writing the book, um, has just been immense.
Wow, that is quite a story.
I tried
Um,
not to ramble too much, so
no, I don't do that. No. Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the book for just a minute. I mean, you divided it into three different sections. And I noticed that readers comment on that they're grateful that you did so. Talk about that structure and how that maybe helped you with the book.
the three different sections.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I really wanted to highlight the experience growing up, chosen, and even before birth family enters the equation, what it's like growing up through that lens. I wanted to honor my adoptive parents because I think nowadays we talk about being adoptive competent. Um, we talk about adoptive parents being sensitive and about adoptee competent. My parents, of course, this is the 60s, so that kind of knowledge and um, information wasn't really as mainstream as I think it's starting to become. But despite that, they were amazing. And I really wanted to honor that and honor them and highlight my experiences growing up. But despite how amazing they were, the feelings that you have of still wanting to know where you came from, still wanting to know what your story is, wanting to know why you weren't kept. So, you know, I think that was really the impetus for part one and really painting the scene and taking you through my journey, becoming a healthcare professional, being a daughter, a wife, a mother, and then enters my birth father, which was, if I look back at my life, even, I'm going to be 58, and if I look back at 80 years old, that will forever be a very pivotal point in my life that was really quite a turning point for me. And painful as it was, I really thought it was important that then the next part of the book start with that. And that was quite a journey. And I give a lot of detail with that. And then part three is the healing and the compassion, because part of my healing was actually having compassion for my birth father, having compassion for Judy, for my birth mother, understanding her story more, and learning more later about my birth father and his trauma that he experienced growing up, I'm not giving him a pass for a lot of the things that I experienced, but you can't ignore the fact that his trauma also impacted how he turned out and what how he reacted and who he developed into. And then finally, just the healing coming full circle. It's still a process, but really feeling like in the end, um, that I can at least share hope and healing. And I think through compassion, even having compassion for his wife, who for a long time I didn't because I was told such horrible stories. But now really seeing her even through a different lens of somebody who was married to this man for 20 years, had no idea he had a daughter, and now entered this daughter that he and I were both mutually kind of obsessed with each other. And it took up the entire room. My family was supportive. For her, I think she'd never had to share him. They didn't have children. She didn't have children. And I do have a much bigger understanding of that now. He fed that, through his
Mm.
narcissism. He made sure I knew and probably embellished a lot of the stories and things that he claimed that she said. Um, and maybe she did, but maybe some of it was also his embellishment. Being able to come through in that third section and finally actually having compassion for her and understanding her place in this whole equation. That was really kind of the motivation. I wanted to tell my story, but I wanted to give you something that you could take away and hopefully grow from it as well.
Mhm.
Good. Yeah, that's great. Um, your healthcare journey. Brooke just put a question in here, which I think is really great, which is was choosing your medical career an outgrowth of adoption. And I want to ask on top of that, like adoptees are often caretakers for other people over ourselves. Is any of that feeding into that, do you think? Or how
Absolutely.
did that choice go for you? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I talk about that in the book too. Like, when was the first hint of how important caretaking was? And I watched my father take care of his mother, his brother. My mom lost her leg in my 20s. I watched him as well as me, walk her through that journey. Um, my mom was a caretaker of her mom. Um, I watched each of them. My dad had a stroke, actually ended up doing great despite that when I was just a teenager, and watching my mom care for him. So, and then just instilled how they cared for me. I mean, when you're an adoptee, you're innately, acutely aware of the fact that you were chosen and folks are choosing to take care of you. And I think that definitely you can't help but that come through in your what you decide to do with your life. I don't know how to be anything but a caretaker. And I
Mhm.
probably knew at 10 I was going to be a nurse.
And then you went out and fulfilled that. Wow.
Yeah.
What does the weight of the word chosen mean to you? How did that dynamic affect you when you were younger, and how do you address that weight now?
I felt like I had to be perfect. I used the term grateful and perfect. I had to make sure that everyone knew I was grateful and perfect, and my parents had to know I was grateful, and I had to be perfect because I didn't want to be given up again. I think you're my kitty. I think what has happened more now with my awareness of Judy's situation and my understanding of what she went through, and that had she had more support, probably would have kept me. Things were very different then. I think now my awareness is I don't have to necessarily be perfect. I'm not going to be given up again. She never wanted to give me up. But that's not something that I understood growing up. And I think that's where the chosen can really get you in trouble, because if you're chosen and you're not perfect, will you be unchosen?
Mhm. Right. Yeah. That's also a very well-known narrative within the adoptee life. Another great question here is, um, oftentimes within birth family, you'll see similarities in career choices and so forth. Are there other medical professionals in your bio family?
Yeah, my aunt. My aunt Jeannie's a nurse. Yep.
Shocking,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Shocking.
Yeah.
So talk about your the work that you do, particularly with women. I've seen you out there. You're a tremendous advocate for women's healthcare. Talk a bit about that. Please teach us what you know.
As far as advocating for women's health care,
Well, I mean, there's that, but there's also just the piece that you have. You said that you were working specifically with women's health and women's health regarding breast cancer and all of that. Can you talk about that a little
yeah,
bit?
I sure can. So, it's daunting for adoptees or folks who don't know their family history for whatever reason. Like I mentioned, either you know one side but not the other, or there's, parents passed away young, so you don't know as much, or someone's estranged. Um, because so much of what we do, especially in cancer testing, screening, really is heavily dependent on family history. Doing a risk assessment for a woman to see their individual risk or lifetime risk for breast cancer, one of the main things that alters that risk is family history. But there are other risk factors, and that's what I try to teach women about, especially women who don't know their family history. One, I see there's a comment about genetic testing. Now it is supposed to be if you contact a genetic testing facility and it is not covered by your insurance, they don't have anything special for adoptees, but they do have cash options anywhere between $200 and $400. And not that that's nothing, but it's not thousands. So there is a cash option if you ever want to have genetic testing. And that's what I explain to my patients who are either adopted or they don't know their family history. Um, in addition, I teach women about other risk factors besides. Breast density is a huge risk factor for breast cancer. It's just as important as family history. If you have dense breast tissue, which we only know on mammogram, that increases your risk by sixfold. So it is just as important as family history. How old you are when you start having periods. If you're younger, 11 and under, that's a risk factor. If you have a baby after age 30, that's a risk factor. Um, if you have a breast biopsy, even if it's benign, that's a risk factor. There are other risk factors besides family history. So I really make an effort to help women understand that and work with them so that we can get the best possible estimate so that they can get the screening. The reason why this is so important is we will start screening sooner if you're at elevated risk. Average risk for a woman in their 40s is about 11% in their lifetime. If I do a risk assessment for somebody who's 35 years old and their risk is 15%, we're going to start screening sooner. So we're going to start mammograms then. Mammogram annually. And if your risk is 20% or greater, we're going to do an MRI, which is going to be able to assess that denser breast tissue, as well as give you another way to image breast and do more screening. Because the sooner we find breast cancer, absolutely mortality goes down. Mammograms have changed the face of breast cancer because of early detection. Some findings we can only see on mammograms. So it's taking into account more than just family history and helping women understand how important these other risk factors are and helping them advocate for themselves. Another type of work I do is I take care of perimenopause and menopause for women. And one of the things women will tell me if they don't know is my mom died early, or I don't know when my mom went through menopause. So helping women understand what the symptoms are, what we can do for menopause, when the symptoms may start, what perimenopause is, so that even though family history matters and it may be helpful, we don't make all of our decisions around that. And how do we empower women to advocate for themselves despite they may not know their family history?
Wow. Thank you. I learned a ton right there. I have a question. So 23andMe does do a lot of health testing with their genetics. Is that an equivalent or close to or not anywhere close to? Yeah, okay.
The literature pretty much leans that it is not an equivalent. There are unfortunately false positives and false negatives. If a woman comes in and tells me that they tested positive for a BRCA1 or 2 mutation, is the most common mutations that women will associate elevated risk for breast cancer, BRCA1, you have about an 85% risk of developing breast cancer. Your risk is higher that it could be in your 30s and 40s, and your risk is higher that it could be triple negative, which is a more aggressive form of breast cancer. So if someone tells me they tested positive, then we're definitely going to do a regular gene panel, and we're going to do what we can to get that gene panel covered. Um, if someone tells me that they were negative on 23andMe, yet they have reasons for us to do genetic testing, such as first or second degree relative diagnosed under the age of 50, or multiple cancers on one side of a family, which unfortunately does lend to family history, or even if somebody just wants to do genetic testing, then working with them to try and have genetic testing beyond a 23andMe is really important because it is not nearly um, as robust or evidence-based as doing one of the formal gene panels. Right now, we're up to about 14 genetic mutations that show us an increased risk for breast cancer. That's just breast cancer. A couple of them show increased risk for ovarian cancer. There are a couple rare mutations that can show an increased risk for colon, pancreatic, melanoma, ovarian, and endometrial. So it's really important that I try and help women advocate for that and beyond 23andMe.
Damn. I wish you could be my person. I bet you have a bunch of women here who'd love to sign up with you right now. I know, I've never learned so much in my life. Wow. Let's go back sort of to the adoption piece of things. I mean, it's like I know that you said that you learned and you grew, in the process of writing this book, of course. Um, what was the deepest learning about yourself in the process of all of that? What really got down below all your layers?
Probably forgiving myself for going down the road that I went with my birth father and losing myself and taking my family with me, forgiving myself for going down that road and losing myself, and really understanding just how powerful it was to meet a birth parent, and especially somebody who can make you feel like you're the only person in the room and can tell a story and weave a story that is so captivating that you really want for your story. You've fantasized about this your whole life, you've wondered your whole life. And then this Prince Charming weaves a story, but then also takes you down a really dark road. Um, it's powerful, it's painful, and it's a hard thing to face when you step back and you realize what you just went through. I think the biggest healing impact for me was forgiving myself for losing myself and letting it affect the relationships around me.
Mm. What advice would you give to another adoptee who is pondering reunion or maybe in the early stages of it?
Therapy from the very beginning, before you meet them, and while you're in that process. Um, Therapy was really powerful. I didn't start therapy till about a year in, but it really made all the difference in the world. And it was probably the first time I really understood the depth of how I identified as an adoptee and how much abandonment fear I had and how much I felt I had to work to keep relationships. I don't think I really understood that until I was in therapy. Therapy definitely helped me through the process and helped me forgive myself for the circumstances that I feel like I found myself in and took everybody with me. Um, I think advice I would have, if you can help it at all, take a moment to pause. I did not. I jumped in feet first, all the way down that rabbit hole. And if I had any advice, I would say if you can help yourself, because it's like I said, you can't go back, you can't close Pandora's box, you can't unknow that information. But if you can find it within you and with help, take a step back and protect yourself. You don't have to give yourself all in, you don't have to be all in. Um, you don't have to be perfect. I found myself wanting to be perfect because if I was perfect for him, he would choose me.
Mhm.
Um, he wouldn't hurt me. But then I finally woke up and realized that wouldn't matter how perfect I was. This is who this person was. And it doesn't mean that's who I am. It doesn't mean that that's who I turned out to be. I did not turn out to be that. So I think advice would be therapy and do the best you can to take a step back and take it slow and protect yourself and your family.
Wow, that's very good advice. Thank you. Um, all right. Anything else that you would like to add before we open it up to everyone else's questions?
Um, just that, through my lens, I think my story can really show an objective whole picture story. I had wonderful adoptive parents, but I still felt that I had to be perfect, grateful, still felt that abandonment wound, especially until I really understood it more. You can meet birth family and it can be beautiful because I have that too. And then you can meet birth family, and just because they're your birth family does not mean it's going to be beautiful. And I think that full range gives me that scope to really be able to hopefully share my story and help others, whatever their journey looks like.
Mm, amazing. Thank you. Okay. Everyone, anyone else who has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or just raise your hand and ask.